Aria Kellmore thought she was finally breaking free until the secret she carried about the Sheikh's son made her vanish into the shadows of Dubai. Overnight, Aria Kellmore lived a life that many dreamed of, but few truly understood. At 20, she had mastered the art of appearing calm and confident in every situation. Whether she was walking through the gates of the Dubai International Airport or posing near sunset beaches for her social media, her world looked glamorous. From the outside, filled with travel photos, neatly packed suitcases, and pictures taken from high floors overlooking the glowing city. But behind every smile was a fatigue that she never admitted to anyone, not even to her closest friend, Myra Vaughn. Aria had joined her airline at a time when she needed escape. Hoping that constant travel would distract her from the pressure, she felt back home in London. Dubai had quickly become her new ground, a place where life moved fast enough to keep her from thinking too deeply. The late-night shifts, hotel layovers, and sudden roster changes left her exhausted, but she enjoyed the freedom that came with unpredictability. She had a routine that gave her comfort: morning coffee at the same corner cafe, afternoon walks through the marina, and quiet nights on her balcony where she watched the endless traffic of boats and yachts. But her routine had broken the day she met Zayden al-Rashif. He wasn't just a wealthy passenger. He was the son of a powerful sheikh whose reputation touched every corner of the Gulf. The connection between them had started innocently during a private flight assignment. Aria wasn't the type to be easily impressed, but Zayden carried himself with a confidence that felt different from other elite passengers she had met. Their lives couldn't have been more opposite. Aria lived in a rented one-bedroom apartment, while Zayden grew up in palaces with guards at every gate, yet something about him pulled her in. Their secret relationship continued in hidden places around Dubai. They met in hotels where no one would recognize them, rooftops where Zayden could see the skyline without being followed, and private villas owned by distant acquaintances. Aria often told herself that she was in control, but every time Zayden reminded her of the risks they were taking, she silently wondered if she was being pulled into something far bigger than she had imagined. Still, the thrill kept her going. She liked the feeling of being wanted by someone so unreachable, but over time, the excitement began to turn into pressure. Aria started to feel trapped inside a secret that wasn't hers to carry. Her phone was filled with coded messages, deleted calls, and hidden folders. She had to be careful about where she went and who she talked to. Zayden's world demanded silence, and Aria was starting to suffocate. Myra Vaughn noticed the small changes before anyone else. Aria became more distracted, more distant. She stopped joining her friends for weekend brunches and often turned off her phone for hours. Myra tried to ask her what was wrong, but Aria brushed it off with tired smiles. She didn't want to involve anyone else in the storm she felt coming. The moment that changed everything came during an evening flight from Singapore. Aria stared out the window at the clouds below, feeling a heaviness she couldn't shake. Her double life was getting harder to manage, and for the first time, she feared the consequences of the path she was on. When she landed back in Dubai and walked through the airport, she felt eyes on her, even though no one was actually watching. Something had shifted inside her. Over the next few days, Aria made a decision that would alter the course of her life. She wanted out. She didn't want to hide anymore, didn't want to fear who might be following her or listening to her calls. She believed that revealing the truth was her only escape, but by choosing that path, she unknowingly stepped into a danger she couldn't undo. Aria's life looked perfect from the outside, but beneath the surface, she was already living her final days, without realizing how quickly everything would unravel. Aria spent the next morning pacing inside her small apartment, unable to settle her thoughts. She kept opening and closing her phone, reading the same messages again and again. Something about the call she had received the night before stayed sharp in her mind. The journalist who contacted her seemed confident, almost too confident, as if he already knew far more than she had ever shared with anyone. His promise of protection echoed in her head. But Aria knew that protection in Dubai, especially against a powerful family, was rarely real. Still, she felt cornered. The secret she had been hiding was slowly consuming her life, and escaping on her own seemed impossible. She thought about Zayden and his warnings. He had always insisted that nothing could ever be revealed. His family name carried weight, and scandals were dealt with silently, with outcomes that never reached the public. Aria finally understood what he meant. If she tried to walk away quietly, she knew she would still be followed, watched, monitored. Her only hope was to expose everything at once so that any attempt to silence her would create even bigger consequences. By afternoon, Aria made a choice. She sent a short message to Myra, telling her that she was going to do something important and that she might not be reachable for a while. Myra was used to Aria's unpredictable work schedule, so she didn't think too much of it, but she sent an unusual urgency in the message. Aria rarely wrote like that unless something was truly weighing on her. As the sun set over the marina, Aria packed a small travel bag. She included documents, printed messages, and a USB containing copied screenshots. She wore simple clothes to avoid drawing attention and left her apartment without informing anyone else. Security cameras captured her walking through the lobby, her steps steady but her eyes filled with tension. She kept her phone in her hand, checking her surroundings every few seconds. Outside, she took a taxi instead of using ride-hailing apps. She knew the digital trail could be traced. The driver barely glanced at her as she sat in the back seat, trying to keep her breathing calm. Aria didn't give him a specific address. She simply asked to be dropped off near the older part of town, an area she had never visited before. She wanted to shake off any follow-up attempts, real or imagined. Meanwhile, in a villa far from the marina, Zayden was receiving news he had never expected. Someone from inside their circle had leaked information about his relationship with Aria. The family was furious. Not because of the affair itself, but because it posed a risk to their reputation. In their world, perception was everything. A single rumor could spiral into political damage. And Aria's sudden boldness was now seen as a threat. His father's advisor instructed Salim Darrow, the family's longtime driver, to locate Aria immediately. Salim was loyal, cautious, and trained to follow orders without question. He began checking the locations she often visited: cafes, malls, her apartment building, and the airline's staff center. Each place gave him nothing. Aria had vanished into the city, leaving no trace. Zayden tried calling her repeatedly, but Aria had turned off her phone. Panic started spreading within the Al-Rashif household. The family wanted the situation handled quietly, without involving authorities, media, or outsiders. Their fear was not for Aria's safety, but for the consequences if she decided to share her story. In the early hours before dawn, the police received a missing person report from Myra. She told them her friend had gone silent after mentioning something serious. Colonel Hammer-Saig was assigned to the case. He reviewed Aria's last known location and immediately sensed that her disappearance was not voluntary. Something about the timing, the secrecy, and the lack of communication pointed to a deeper issue. By sunrise, Aria was officially missing. Her phone remained off, her apartment untouched, and her whereabouts unknown. Dubai police began tracing her final steps, but they didn't yet know that another search was already in motion, organized by the powerful family she had hoped to escape. Colonel Hammer-Saig started his investigation by reviewing the taxi footage that captured Aria leaving her building. The time-stamp confirmed that she had left close to midnight, a detail that immediately raised suspicion. Most people avoided traveling alone at that hour unless something urgent pushed them out. He questioned the taxi driver, who recalled dropping her off in an older district of Dubai, an area known for quiet streets, aging buildings, and very few surveillance cameras. Aria had no documented connections there. No friends, no work obligations, no previous visits. The colonel made note of this inconsistency, marking it as a critical thread in a puzzle that was quickly expanding. Meanwhile, Myra Vaughn grew increasingly anxious. She replayed Aria's last message repeatedly, searching for hidden meaning. Aria was not someone who acted impulsively. Even when stressed, she thought things through carefully. Myra began recalling the details Aria had hesitantly shared with her weeks earlier. Aria had mentioned that she wasn't just dating someone. She was involved with a man whose family carried enormous influence. She never gave names, but her fear was clear. Myra realized that whatever Aria had been planning the night she disappeared, it involved the secrets she had been keeping. When Myra arrived at the police station, she handed over a small envelope that Aria had once entrusted to her. It contained printouts, screenshots, and a short note saying that the information needed to be protected. Colonel Saig examined the contents and immediately understood the seriousness of the case. Aria had evidence that connected her directly to Zayden al-Rashif. This was no longer a simple disappearance. It was a potential political scandal involving one of the most influential families in the country. Zayden, on the other hand, was growing restless. His family had locked down all communication about Aria. They insisted that this situation must remain contained. The possibility of media involvement terrified them more than anything Aria herself could do. Zayden wanted to find her, but was restricted by the advisors who surrounded his father. They reminded him that any public involvement from him would expose the affair. Their primary concern was preventing embarrassment, not uncovering the truth. Selim. Darrow was questioned next. Colonel Saig noticed the hesitation in his voice as he answered basic questions. Salim claimed he hadn't seen Aria in days, yet his eyes avoided contact and his hands trembled slightly. Years of interrogations had trained the colonel to read body language as clearly as spoken words. Salim was scared either of telling the truth or of the consequences of hiding it. The colonel noted his nervousness, knowing it would become useful. Later, as the investigation expanded, more inconsistencies surfaced. Aria's bank activity showed no transactions after she left her apartment. Her phone remained off from the moment she entered the taxi. No CCTV footage captured her beyond the old district. The only thing that grew clearer was the fact that she didn't disappear voluntarily. Someone had intervened. The story deepened when a witness from the old district stepped forward. He recalled seeing a black SUV parked in an alley around the same time Aria was dropped off. He remembered it clearly because the vehicle didn't match the usual cars seen in that neighborhood. When shown photos of different models, he pointed to one commonly used by high-ranking families and private security teams. The colonel wasn't surprised. This detail aligned too closely with the direction his investigation was heading, even if no one dared to speak the names involved. One afternoon, Mira received a call from Lena Arashif, Zayden's sister. Lena didn't reveal her identity at first, but she asked to meet Myra privately. Her voice carried worry, almost guilt, hinting she knew something important. When they met, Lena admitted she had overheard her brother arguing with Salim the night Aria vanished. She didn't know the details, but the tension in the house was unmistakable. Something had gone wrong. This new information pushed Colonel Sheikh to widen his search. He requested access to properties owned by the al-Rashi family. Although the request was delayed, he eventually received permission to inspect a remote estate that had been unused for years. Inside, its dusty rooms and abandoned hallways, investigators found the first physical traces of Aria's presence. Small fibers from clothing and faint marks on the floor that suggested someone had struggled. The colonel stepped outside, scanning the silent desert surrounding the property. The case was no longer about finding a missing woman. It had become a race to uncover the truth before powerful hands erased every trace she had ever existed. Colonel Hamir Sheikh left the abandoned estate with a heavy certainty forming in his mind. The faint fibers and marks on the floor were not enough to confirm what happened, but they strongly suggested Aria had been there against her will. He ordered a forensic team to sweep every inch of the property. Dusty footprints, partial tire impressions, and small traces of rope fibers began to emerge. Each clue pointed to a hurried attempt to clean up, though not done carefully enough to avoid detection. Whoever had brought Aria there believed no one would ever search the place. That assumption was beginning to fall apart. Mira Vaughn, who had insisted on being updated throughout the case, felt her fear tightening with each new revelation. She struggled to sleep, replaying memories of Aria, laughing, overworked, exhausted, and hopeful. Mira had always admired her strength, but now she wondered if Aria had ever truly been safe. She visited Colonel Sheikh's office again, hoping for reassurance. Instead, she received the news that Aria's disappearance was no longer considered an isolated incident. It was now tied to potential criminal involvement by individuals far above the reach of ordinary law. At the Al-Rashif residence, tension rose like a storm waiting to break. Zayden felt cornered, unable to move freely under the watchful eyes of his father's advisors. They insisted that any action he took would worsen the situation. Their silence was a deliberate strategy. If Aria was found, the scandal would explode. If she wasn't, her story would eventually fade. Zayden found himself trapped between the weight of his guilt and the impossibility of fighting his own family. He knew Aria had been planning to reveal their relationship, but he never believed she would actually follow through. Now he feared the consequences of every choice he had made. Salim Darrow, meanwhile, became increasingly unsettled. He had carried out many tasks for the Al-Rashif family over the years, but the night of Aria's disappearance had crossed a line he had hoped never to reach. He had driven the black SUV under strict instructions, transported Aria to the remote estate, and remained present as others took control of the situation. The memory of her fear lingered in his mind. Salim feared the truth coming out, but he feared the family's reaction even more. Still, guilt began to erode his silence. Forensic results returned with more troubling details. Soil samples found on the estate floor matched a patch of land behind the building where the ground had recently been disturbed. The team began digging, expecting the worst. Instead, they uncovered discarded items: Aria's broken bracelet, a torn section of her travel bag, and a piece of duct tape. These objects indicated restraint but no remains. The colonel felt equal parts relief and dread. Aria might still be alive, but the brutality of the scene suggested she was running out of time. News of the findings reached Lena Rashif, who had been secretly monitoring the investigation. She was the only one in her family torn between loyalty and humanity. Her past interactions with Aria had been brief yet warm, and she had sensed the genuine bond between Aria and her brother long before the affair became known. Lena felt compelled to act. She arranged another meeting with Mira, this time willing to take a greater risk. Lena revealed that a second, more private property existed, one rarely used and never recorded publicly. It was a secure house, maintained for situations requiring secrecy. When Colonel Sheikh learned of this location, he immediately organized a discreet team to approach it. They traveled at dawn to minimize attention, using unmarked vehicles to avoid tipping off anyone connected to the al-Rashid family. The house stood isolated, surrounded by barren land. The windows were heavily tinted and the doors reinforced. Everything about it suggested concealment. As the investigators broke inside, the air felt unnaturally still. Furniture was sparse, rooms were empty, and the lights were left on as if someone had vacated recently. In the back room, they found more evidence ropes, empty water bottles, and a single scarf believed to belong to Aria. No sign of her body, no indication of where she had been taken next. But the pattern was clear. Someone was moving her from location to location, always one step ahead. The colonel stood in the silent room, sensing that the investigation had moved into its most dangerous phase. The people involved were becoming desperate. Their next move would be decisive, and whatever they planned, Aria's fate would depend on how quickly he could anticipate it. Colonel Sheikh reviewed every new piece of information with increasing urgency. Aria was no longer just a missing person. She was a woman being moved systematically, hidden deliberately, and controlled by people who understood how to erase footprints. Every hour mattered. Now he gathered his team, choosing only those he trusted, and began mapping all private routes, estates, and offshore connections linked to the al-Rashid family. Each lead seemed promising at first, yet vanished like smoke. When examined closely, whoever orchestrated this operation had influence, resources, and a clear intention to keep Aria silent. Meanwhile, Mira Vaughn struggled between hope and heartbreak. She kept replaying her memories of Aria, her laughter during their late-night conversations, her excitement about travel, her exhaustion after long flights, and the spark in her eyes whenever she mentioned someone she cared about. Mira refused to believe her friend was gone. The discovery of Aria's belongings at the hidden estate only strengthened her resolve. She spent hours driving around the city, passing places where Aria used to wander, hoping for a sign that she had escaped. She held on to every possibility, even when the police warned her that the situation was becoming increasingly severe. At the al-Rashid residence, pressure was reaching its peak. The patriarch of the family, Sheikh Omar al-Rashid, demanded immediate control over the situation. The affair had reached more ears than expected, and whispers were beginning to circulate. In political circles, they feared exposure far more than legal consequences. The family's advisors urged a swift resolution, insisting that the longer Aria remained missing, the more dangerous the situation became. Zayden, unable to contain his frustration, confronted the advisor overseeing the retrieval operation. His emotions finally broke through the silence he had been forced to maintain. He feared what the family might do next and realized that his attempt to protect Aria by keeping her hidden had spiraled into something monstrous. Salim Darrow sensed the end, approaching 2 days. He had followed orders, driving between remote locations, transporting supplies, and ensuring no trace was left behind. But the guilt had grown heavier with each passing hour. He knew Aria wasn't a threat. She was simply a woman who wanted her life back. Salim finally decided he could no longer obey the instructions that had put her in harm's way. Under the cover of night, he left the al-Rashid villa with a single goal to lead authorities to Aria's last known location. Salim's trembling hands dialed Colonel Sheikh's number from an unregistered phone. His voice cracked as he confessed everything he knew. Colonel Sheikh immediately mobilized his team. Salim guided them to a final safe house, one even Lena al-Rashid didn't know existed. The location was deep in the desert, surrounded by dunes that made it invisible from main road. As the convoy of unmarked vehicles approached, Salim warned them that the men guarding the house rarely hesitated. The colonel signaled his officers, and in minutes they surrounded the structure. The night was silent, except for the soft crunch of sand under boots. Then, a single loud crash shattered the stillness as the team breached the door. Inside, lights flickered over cold concrete floors and empty rooms. The house seemed abandoned at first. But in the farthest room, behind a heavy wooden door, they found her. Aria Kellmore was alive, weak, dehydrated, but conscious. She sat against the wall with her hands tied, her breath shallow but steady. The moment the officers reached her, tears welled in her eyes, relief washing through her like a collapsing wave. She had survived days of isolation, fear, and uncertainty. Colonel Sheikh carefully lifted her to her feet and guided her to safety. Back in the city, news spread quietly but rapidly. The al-Rashid family attempted to suppress the details, but internal fractures had already begun to show. Lena distanced herself, horrified by what had been done in the name of protecting reputation. Zayden, overwhelmed by guilt, faced the reality that his silence had nearly cost Aria her life. Salim surrendered himself fully, accepting the consequences for his involvement but hopeful that speaking out would protect others in the future. Aria's recovery was long, but her determination remained unbroken. She provided her testimony to the authorities, ensuring every detail was documented. Her story revealed a world few understood, her world, where power could hide crimes in plain sight and silence those who threatened it. But she had survived long enough to expose it. The case became one of the quietest, yet most consequential investigations in Dubai's recent history, though the final outcomes were never made fully public. The truth lingered beneath the surface, whispered in careful circles. Aria Kellmore vanished once, but she returned stronger, bringing with her a story that those who heard would never forget.